I'm Rob Lippencott. I'm Senior Vice President of Education for Public Television for PBS, the national headquarters of public television in the Washington, D.C. area. I help put together the programs that accompany the television programs into schools. We create television which is appropriate for education, and we create a lot of other materials that help teachers apply media, television, web, interactive materials, lesson plans, articles, in the areas and the concepts of what television is about. The younger workers are coming with a much wider lens about who they are and who they can deal with and what they can say to whom and when they can do things. There's a much more open world, in a sense, I think, because they've watched many more kinds of people say many more things than I ever did, or than sort of a boomer generation, which was exposed, especially in early years of television, a major medium, and in fact other media as well, print media and so forth, to a relatively constricted, relatively sanitized. People changed their names to become movie stars. People dressed a certain way. They acted a certain way. They kind of conformed to a stereotype. Now there's a very careful, actually, production process that includes a much wider, not necessarily the full spectrum, but a much wider selection of people and lifestyles. And in fact, out into the cable and onto the web especially, huge diversity now of just about anything. There is in every language newspaper, there is in every language soap opera, there is in any culture. And in fact, when I say every language, I don't just mean different foreign language, but I mean all kinds of language, acceptable and not. And so the edges of what's been considered acceptable in the workplace has changed. Their expectation about who's the boss and about how they dress are not the same as a boomer would have had. And all those things add up to sometimes a fresh perspective as in new, and sometimes a fresh perspective as in rude. But they are much more open, I think much less prejudiced, although there's a lot of that still because of their families and their regional predispositions and so forth. I think the thousand flowers bloom, thousands of streams of consciousness is something that we're going to see the reaction to, going to see the effect of more than we have. In fact, I think the last generation, and perhaps no more importantly than with millennials, we've seen the kind of homogenization. The same stores are in every mall. The same menu is in every McDonald's, and McDonald's is everywhere. The same channels, the same sports teams, or the same activities about a sports team. What's different is you're in a different city. So their lives have been kind of managed in that way by media. And I think media has had a gigantic impact. We used to argue in the early days of television, or they used to argue in the early days of television, about whether it was really teaching people anything. And I think the argument is over. The question is not whether people are learning from television and media, but the question is, what are they learning? And exactly how quickly are they learning? And can they learn much more, or have they just understood where that information is if they need it? And they'll go get it if they need it. And they, in fact, now live in kind of almost a superficial layer of conversation about stuff. We use language like thinking outside the box. Everybody wants new ideas, new thinking. So we're going to get new stuff, and we want to try different approaches. So there's an encouragement at the very most formal level to try something new. And there are fewer regulations and fewer technical barriers around how you can sort of take an idea. I mean, you borrow your best ideas. And so plagiarism and sort of copying things, I mean, a lot is derivative. Television is derivative. I mean, all the movies this summer are going to be something or other 3, 4, or 5. All the songs that you hear are actually made up of 5 or 6 different songs that came before them, or they're covers for songs that were great hits 30 years ago. So that kids have kind of an immersion in a culture that doesn't say everything has to be entirely original or entirely formal or sort of recognized the same way we thought it had to be attributed. You know, there are certain stylistic ways of recognizing a source. Well, they sort of put together a memo quickly, and it's a bunch of different ideas from a bunch of different people. They're less formal about that. I'm not saying that they're necessarily even not respecting the ideas, but they'll bring them together and present them much more casually, much more quickly.